Since 1985, the introduction of the lionfish in the Atlantic, lionfish have grown exponentially. The exponential growth of lionfish in the Atlantic can be attributed to larval dispersal, which is the release and deposit of eggs, continuous reproduction, and high fecundity. As a highly piscivorous species, lionfish consume many fish and disrupt the food chain in the Atlantic Ocean. Lionfish are carnivores that prey on herbivores such as the fairy baslet, white grump, bicolored damselfish, and dusky blenny. Experiments by marine scientist Albin show that a single lionfish can reduce the number of small native fish in the Bahamas by almost 80% in 5 weeks. Through preying on native fish species, lionfish also reduce coral reef biodiversity in the Atlantic, as coral reefs depend on specific species like parrotfish for their ecological systems. Parrotfish feed on seaweed and macroalgae, and without parrotfish, the overgrowth of the seaweed and macroalgae would result in the smothering of coral reefs. These images depict the gradual health decline of the Carey's Fort Reef in Key Largo, Florida. Not only do lionfish reduce native fish species and cause the smothering of coral reefs in the Atlantic, they also disrupt the food web. Though lionfish are carnivores, they are generally classified as mesopredators, a medium-sized and medium trophic level predator, but this is changing. Top predators would generally include sharks and groupers, yet groupers generally avoid healthy lionfish to prey on smaller fish due to the venomous spines of lionfish. In multiple studies, lionfish were placed in tanks with groupers, but groupers, generally considered a larger predator, avoided these lionfish. Sharks do prey on lionfish, but as shown in this table, the number of sharks in the Atlantic are decreasing, mostly due to shark fin trades. The decreasing number of sharks, a natural predator of lionfish, allows lionfish to roam the Atlantic Ocean, preying on herbivores and disrupting the food web. Not only are lionfish disrupting the food web, they are also altering the established trophic levels in the Atlantic. Trophic levels are hierarchical levels in an ecosystem. Top trophic levels in the Atlantic are generally associated with sharks. However, as mentioned before, due to the dwindling number of sharks in the Atlantic, lionfish have started to emerge as a top carnivore in the top trophic level. This image depicts the food web in the Atlantic, organized vertically through trophic levels, with top predators at the top of the figure and primary producers at the bottom of the figure. As seen in the image, the green node represents sharks. Prior to the introduction of lionfish in the Atlantic, sharks were apex predators. However, after the lionfish invasion, lionfish have become the apex predator. The introduction of the lionfish has changed the food web and trophic levels in the Atlantic. Lionfish also impact economies that rely on tourism and recreational activities. Diving, on its own, brings $2.1 billion to countries in the Caribbean. Hotels, diving centers, restaurants, and the employees in these areas rely on tourists. This table shows the decline in the tourism industry in the Caribbean from 2000 to 2013. Though the tourism industry is not certain what caused the decline, there may be correlation between the lionfish invasion and the decrease in tourism. The decrease in native fish species and reduction in coral reef biodiversity may turn tourists away from areas in the Atlantic to other destinations. The venomous spines of lionfish also make diving dangerous for humans, another possible cause for the decreasing number of tourists in the Atlantic.
Lionfish consume huge amounts of native fish species and reduce coral reef biodiversity in the Atlantic. However, the explosive growth of lionfish and its establishment in the Atlantic make typical methods to eliminate lionfish very difficult. Environmentalists, scientists, ecologists, and researchers worry about the disruption lionfish have caused in the Atlantic ecosystem. To counteract the impact of lionfish, many ads and campaigns have been created in countries surrounding the Atlantic Ocean that advertise eating lionfish to save coral reefs. To many humans, this seems the most plausible solution, but in reality has very little, if any, effect on the lionfish population.
The federal plan to combat invasive lionfish by eating them is supported by environmentalists, scientists, ecologists, and researchers. However, this plan is not very effective. In the year 2010, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration launched a well-publicized campaign with flashy ads, lionfish cookbooks, and the catchy slogan, "Eat them to beat them." The Reef Environmental Education Foundation has also released multiple copies of the Lionfish Cookbook, which includes 45 recipes on how to cook lionfish. The cookbook also includes tips on how to handle the creature's venomous spines.
Health in relation to eating lionfish. So although eating lionfish is something tasty that you can do, there are possible problems with it. Ciguatera poisoning is something that comes from quote-unquote eating fish that contains toxins produced by a marine microalgae called Gambierdiscus toxicus. And the FDA ran experiments to test this. The FDA ran experiments on 194 lionfish to test for toxin levels. Results of the experiment showed that 42% had detectable levels of ciguatoxin, while 26% had toxin levels that were above the FDA's illness threshold. Now, let's move on to the symptoms of ciguatera poisoning. The first symptom for ciguatera poisoning is, that's right, nausea. And there's also more, such as vomiting. And there are other symptoms too, such as an inverted sense of hot and cold and tingling sensations. Now, to those of you who may believe that there's a cure, I'll give you a few seconds to try to guess. Alright, that's enough. So, now, the answer to your question is nah. There is no cure for ciguatera poisoning. There is only one thing you can do if you have it, and that is, that's right, ladies and gentlemen, you wait it out.
I don't know.
I think they're kind of like predators, so like maybe mechanical killers. Eat them too.
So Jackie would like to implement RoboCops into the senior section.
No, I'm kidding.
Vote RoboCops 2016. Thanks, friends.
I don't know. I think like
Cut it.
people should tell him they're creepy.
Cut.
Like next year he'd
Cut.
be such a he'd be one of those creepy
Cut.
seniors who would sit in this depression.
Cut.
Well, you can introduce another invasive species that eats the lionfish. And when that second invasive species becomes too invasive, add another one. And guess what? Add another one after that. And then another one, and another one, and another one. And by that last another one, we'll be all right.
The most effective long-term solution is a continual restock of sharks, a natural predator of the lionfish. However, overfishing makes this difficult. Many fishermen kill sharks because fins are valuable, sometimes selling for as much as $500 a pound or $1,100 a kilogram. The slow growth and low reproductive rates of sharks make them highly susceptible to extinction. It is difficult for many shark species to replenish their populations at the same rates as they are being diminished. This allows lionfish to roam the Atlantic waters with few natural predators.
However, under the efforts of scientists, researchers, ecologists, and environmentalists around the world, people are beginning to realize the critical role sharks play in ecosystems. Governments are beginning to protect sharks. For instance, under the Shark Conservation Act of 2010, all sharks caught in U.S. waters must be brought to shore with their fins still attached. 22 countries have put policies into place to regulate shark finning and protect shark populations since 1994. Through the increased conservation of sharks, natural predators of lionfish, the growth of the lionfish population can be slowed. As Ladd Atkins, who works at the Reef Environmental Education Foundation, accurately stated, The entire Atlantic region is going to be affected by lionfish, and that includes everyone who lives here, works here, or is just visiting. The whole region needs to work together as a group to address this issue.